one of the things I just wanted to say is from the starting point is that sometimes when people come to adoption, they're quite taken aback at the notion of contact in adoption. They think, well, why would you be having contact with a family that haven't been able to look after the child? What's that about? And I suppose that's a reasonable position to come to. And what we hope to do here is really just explain a bit about why contact for children is right if it is right for them, and it has to fit with the child's needs. And the whole issue of contact is not about the adults, it's about whether it enhances the child's life if they have some kind of life connection with their previous family in their past. So that's really the kind of sort of backdrop to. We've only got 2 or 3 slides, so you'll not be sitting for very long listening to this, honestly. So.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Steve. So, what is the purpose of contact? And primarily, it is child-focused, and it's meant to meet the best interests of the child. The notion of it is also to help the child grow with contemporary knowledge of his or her birth family. It reduces the child's potential anxiety about the birth family's well-being, and I know my colleagues in social work will know that children often wonder and worry about their birth mum or dad. Are they okay? Or indeed their siblings. Contact also will promote the possibility of the child being able to integrate the parts of their identity that relate to their birth heritage and the developing understanding of their present and future self, family and place in the world. It's a really important bit in terms of contact, because we talk about integration and the integrating of your early life and your adoptive life. So, make sense? It also provides the birth family with a mechanism by which they can derive reassurance that their birth child is well, happy and safe. And we are very aware of that because we do some letterbox contact and some direct face-to-face contact with some birth families. And it's very powerful in terms of just that reassurance that somebody knows that their birth child is thriving and safe and well.
What's letterbox contact?
Letterbox contact would be where the birth parent would provide a letter, usually once, maybe twice a year, to the child. And again, that's done in a supportive way. The letter has to be written in a way that's appropriate, that can be shared with the child and by the adoptive family. So it might be, "Dear Sam, how are you? I know you're 6. I hear that you're at primary 2 or primary 3 and that you ride a bike and you go swimming, and I hope you're well." So it's just information to the child to let them know their birth mother knows that they're well and safe. And again, like that, the adoptive family would return a letter saying, "Dear Sandra, Sam is doing very well. Yes, he's loving school. He's brilliant on his bike. We're going on holidays in August. All is well." It's just a reassurance that the child is doing well. Okay. Guidance and support is given to both the birth family and the adoptive family about how to do that, because sometimes people might write stuff that's really not appropriate. So that's where, again, support is offered for that. And I suppose the other thing we would say is that it allows the birth family to remain connected to a supportive worker who can help them through the different stages of understanding about what happened to them and to their birth child, because there are some birth parents who probably had a poor experience of when their child had to be taken from them. They might have been a young parent, a parent who had mental health problems, who might have had drug and alcohol problems, or just might have been an immature young person who wasn't ready to be a parent. And sometimes they have been a forgotten number of people. So again, there are parents who really do and can grow with their understanding of, I wasn't ready to be a parent then. And people change, and people can prove and demonstrate that they can be a good parent to other children. So it has that positive effect as well.
I suppose one of the things to also say about contact is that it may be when you hear contact and adoption, you immediately think, well, that must be face-to-face, meeting up with their birth family on a regular basis. And that would only apply to a very small number of children. Most adopted children, if they're having contact with their birth family, it'll be what Rita's described, the sort of information exchange that we would hope and encourage the birth family to be able to put something in writing, maybe photographs as well, that can be shared with the child through their adopters, but also the adopters, and sometimes they can help their child write something back so that they get a bit of information, and maybe a photograph carefully taken so that it doesn't necessarily identify where the child is living. Because most contact is done through a third party, and it would either be the local authority who placed the child with you would receive the information and pass it on, or it would be done through the agency that approved you, so that it's not coming directly to you from birth parents, it's through an intermediary. And that's about kind of sort of maintaining that safe distance that allows for the contact to be promoted sort of properly and appropriately. Most of it, I say, is letterbox contact, as we call it, or information exchange, and not face-to-face. But for a small number of children, they are able to have face-to-face contact, and it may not be necessarily with a birth family. It could be with a grandparent who's been very supportive but wasn't able to care for the child. It could be another relative. So and that is what I was saying at the beginning. It's about what is the best needs, how would the needs of this child best be met, and if contact is something that will enhance their life for the reasons Rita was just sort of going through, then we need to look at how we manage that as well as possible. I suppose looking at the key components, it's really important that the social workers that are working with you as adoptive parents and with your child have a good understanding of what adoption feels like for children and what it feels like for birth families, because then they can promote proper and good forms of contact that help people to really kind of move on and have a good sense of where they've come from if it's a child, and for parents, my child is safe. Even though I can't care for it, I know that these people are looking after my child, and that gives me some comfort. So it's important that workers have the skill to be able to facilitate that. Also, I suppose, from our point of view, we need to be able to prioritise and recognise the importance of contact in an adoption service for families and for children, and that it won't always be the case that children will have contact, but we need to explore whether it's appropriate or not for every child. And we would do that alongside, as a voluntary agency, alongside our local authority colleagues. I suppose, in order to do it well, the people that are involved, including you as adopters for children, need to know as much about the child's history and about their past as possible. And then what that means is the better you understand the situation that a child has come from into adoption, the more likely you're going to have a bit of empathy for the needs of the birth parents as well as the needs of your child and your own needs. I think, as Rita said, it's really important for many of these people. They've had children taken away from them because they've not been able to care for them properly and not been able to safeguard their needs. But that doesn't mean that they necessarily did that deliberately. It may be that the life circumstances have meant that they haven't been equipped to care properly for children through their own early life experiences and probably poor parenting themselves. And so people who have had that kind of life experience need to be understood and not vilified because they've not been able to care for their children. And that's easier said than done, because for some children they may have had really difficult, traumatic experiences in their birth family. But we need to be able to try and see it as best as we can in the context of, you know, the birth parents' own sort of poor early life experiences. It only really works well when there is an openness and a willingness to promote contact positively for the child, both on the part of the adopters and on the part of the birth parents. And sometimes contact isn't maintained because that doesn't exist, that either the adopters are struggling to see the relevance for the child, or the birth parents are doing inappropriate things around writing stuff that really isn't appropriate for their child to be hearing or understanding. And quite often, for many of these birth parents, they don't necessarily have the skills to maintain the contact, to be able to write coherently and well, and just there's usually a lot of other things that are going on in their lives that stop them being able to concentrate and do it well. So it is about having a positive, open relationship, and that usually works the best for children. What we wanted to do really just to wind up was just give you a couple of examples of contact from our own experience. And the example I was going to just use is a child who was placed for adoption at 4, a boy. He had his final contact with his birth father about 2 weeks, face-to-face contact, about 2 weeks before he moved to his new adoptive home. And he had a visit to Edinburgh Zoo with his social worker, with his siblings who were placed in other adoptive homes, and with his father. And that went very well. Once he moved to his adopters, there was no longer any face-to-face contact, but what we promoted and encouraged, and the adopters were very keen to do it, was to pass information once a year to the birth father. So that started when the boy was 4 and continued until he was about 12, 13. And one year, when the father phoned to say, you know, has my contact letter come in, I had said it hadn't, but I was in touch with the adopters. And when I spoke to the adopters, they were saying, actually, our son doesn't want to do it. He's decided that he's not happy to pass information because this is his family and his birth family don't mean anything to him. That's what he was saying, and we had to hear that and listen to it and respect it. Now, that was quite tough for me to then go back to the birth father, who had been receiving letters and photographs for like sort of 7, 8 years. And he accepted it because he did understand it was his son's choice, but it was hard for him. A year later, I had some contact again with the adopters and said to him, well, how's he feeling? And I met with him and we talked it through. And he said, well, actually, I'm quite happy to send a letter this year. I just didn't want to do it last year, but I'm happy to do it this year because I kind of got over that little sort of hump that he had about his birth family. And it was at a point in his identity where he was trying to work out where he belonged. As we do pre-teen, early teens, starting to work out where you fit in the world. And he needed to assert himself there. And he has decided to do it again. And that was this year. Contact happened again, it went well. Every year now it will be up for review and it'll be up to that boy to decide. And, you know, and that works well because actually the father hadn't had an easy life. He had brain damage, having had an accident, so he was struggling with lots of things in his life. And this was a really important part of his life, that he used to get the pictures blown up and put them up on his wall and stuff. And, you know, and I think the boy and the adopters had a bit of empathy for him and could support that. But it was about the child in the end, as he was mature enough to make decisions, we listened to them and went along with them. Okay, Rita, you've just got an example before we finish, yeah?
Okay, this won't be long, I hope. This is an example of an adopter that I worked with. She was a single adopter, and the child she adopted was the oldest of 3 children, 3 siblings. And for whatever reason, when the children were placed with individual adopters, one was down in England, it was decided I think at the matching panel that there should be no contact between the children. So that was written on a minute. However, the woman that I was working with had said, I really don't think this is after about 9, 12 months placement. She said, you know, that's not fair. These are 3 siblings who are full siblings. They have a right to know where each other is and how each other is. So with her, we started a process of getting in touch with the other adopters to meet, essentially to see how all the children were and how they felt about having some kind of contact. Now, I put that accolade onto that single adopter because she, with support from ourselves, but she was the main person who pioneered the opportunity for these children to see each other at least once a year. And that means travelling to England. And it has paid off hugely because this older girl did have a sense of responsibility for her 2 young siblings. She can rest assured knowing that her sister has her own mummy and daddy, her brother has his own mummy and daddy, and she's got her own mummy, and they're all being well and truly looked after. So it's been normalised. They send Christmas cards and birthday cards and cards when they're on holidays. And so for those 3 children, they are growing up with a much more healthier and more integrated understanding about why I was adopted. And I just think it's a really good example of how even adopters themselves, you know, can have that kind of power to change such a significant decision. That's the end of our presentation. Thank you very much.